Chapter 1 is entitled, What is Organizational Behavior? Now, organizational behavior is a very broad topic, and Chapter 1 is very broad in its scope. Chapter 1 goes through a variety of different things, but is really more of an overview of what organizational behavior is. It kind of sets the tone for the rest of the course, tells you, what is this animal called organizational behavior, and how does it operate? First thing we have to look at is interpersonal skills, and the reason why we have to look at that first is because organizational behavior is all about the organization. And an organization, by definition, is about interpersonal skills. If you are running a business all by yourself, well then, interpersonal skills are important when you're dealing with your customers and dealing with your vendors, dealing with the people that you do business with, but it's not quite as important as when you're talking about dealing within an organization. Because when you're dealing with an organization, part of productivity means sharing your ideas, getting input from other people, having a situation by which everybody can give each other feedback. So these, good places to work. What do I mean by good places to work over here? Well, here we mean things where the employees enjoy the work. That doesn't mean employees don't want breaks now and then, but places that employees look forward to coming to, where they develop strong interpersonal relationships. And studies have shown that places to work that are quote-unquote good places to work, where the employees enjoy working there and the employees enjoy working with the people around them, tend to have superior financial performance. You can also attract other people, attract people who are good from other companies. Companies like Google, and Microsoft was probably the original one. Microsoft had this huge campus in Redmond, Washington, and it was just fantastic, and everybody wanted to come work for them, and that's one of the ways that Microsoft became this incredibly powerful company in the 1990s. Although today maybe it's not quite as powerful as it once was, it's still pretty powerful. Companies like Google also built their reputation, at least partially, on their extremely friendly Mountaindale, California campus, where people are treated so nicely that people just love to come to work for Google, aside from the fact that it's a huge company and it's very powerful, and aside from the fact that they probably pay pretty well. Their organization, in terms of how they operate, in terms of how they treat their employees, is also a big factor. And there is a strong association between the quality of the relationships by the people within the organization, their satisfaction, which obviously helps their morale and their productivity, the stress, which obviously there's going to be some stress in every job, but you want to minimize it you want to minimize it as much as possible, and having good interpersonal relationships in the firm can help with that, and turnover. Ideally, you'd like to have as little turnover as possible, because when you hire somebody new, you have to invest maybe months in training the person, and you have to invest resources that if people are constantly coming and leaving, should be used to furthering the business of the organization. And of course, increasing organizational behavior principles can foster social responsibility awareness, which overall can help the reputation of the firm. By social responsibility awareness, I mean awareness of people that to behave in an ethical manner, to interact with society in a way that's positive. So now let's look at the field of organizational behavior and how we're going to study it. Organizational behavior in general studies the influence that individuals, groups, and the structure, in other words the company, whatever organization you're dealing with, it could be a nonprofit corporation, it could be pretty much anything, has on the behavior within the organization. So again, we're talking about the effect of the people that work for it. We're talking about the effect of the groups within it, maybe labor unions, maybe the manufacturers, the salespeople, the accounting department interact with each other, and of course the group itself and the policies of the organization itself. And the goal of organizational behavior is to apply that knowledge to try to make sure that the organization is as effective as possible. Organizational behavior has a lot of focal points. Jobs themselves, work, which means the productivity of the company, absenteeism, people not showing up to work, how can we avoid that sort of thing, employment turnover, how could we avoid people leaving the company for greener pastures because there's some problem with the organization? Productivity, of course, which is kind of synonymous with work. Work is actually doing it, and productivity is getting the job done. So I guess you could work a lot, but if you don't work effectively, you're not productive. Or you could work a little, but if you work effectively, you can be more productive. So work and productivity are not always the exact same thing. Human performance, and of course, management, running the show. And the idea of organizational behavior, the reason to study it, not to just, fly off the seat of your pants and to do what you think might be right, is to complement intuition with systematic study. Intuition is a word that you probably have heard in other contexts. Intuition is your gut feeling, what you think probably is right just based on your own personal experience. You're not really sure about much else. But systematic study is where you take those gut feelings and you see, well, do those stand up to the rigor of testing? Are those properly, when you test them, do they actually work out? So the organizational behavior, the goal of organizational behavior, or a goal of organizational behavior, is to kind of complement what you think probably is true from your experience with, okay, data. And that really is the idea of systematic study, which examines relationships, looks and see, okay, we implemented this program with the 401k last year. Did turnover decrease? Was there a causal relationship, as they say, between this policy and this outcome? And, kind of an outcomes assessment. Attempts to attribute causes and effects. Why is it that 17 people left our company last year? Was it because we cut everybody's salary? Was it because we, took the air conditioning out for the summer? Or, was it because of some random fluctuation in the economy? And it bases conclusions on scientific evidence, which means data that was collected and measured, interpreted in a rigorous manner. Just like when you're talking about a scientific experiment, you want to make sure that the causes and effects line up properly by proper experimentation. Organizational behavior tries to use the scientific method in that same way. Part of systematic study is the idea that everything should be based on evidence, management, how you effect policies, how you deal with your employees should be based on evidence, not just gut feelings. There is some room for intuition and for some ideas based on experience, based on the kind of, sixth sense or your spidey sense as to how things should be. But primarily, they should be based on evidence. And even these things that you feel based on gut feelings should be testable. And you should be able to make a determination based on evidence as to whether those things are correct. The overall looking at things through data is this concept of big data. Sometimes when people say big data, they mean statisticians or people that look into trends that are based on numbers. When they talk, for example, about politics, there are statisticians that look at politics based on poll numbers and based on fundamentals that may have different ideas about how things are going to run than, let's say, somebody that looks at things based on punditry or based on how things have, just based on how people think an election will turn out. And this idea of big data is the extensive use of statistical compilation and analysis. And part of organizational behavior is, of course, designed to take advantage of this idea of big data, to identify predictive statistics, which means if we're going to take away 3 vacation days, that means, based on 100 times this has been done in the past by various companies in the city, we know there's probably going to be a 5% higher turnover rate. That would be an example of a predictive statistic. It's obviously not that easy to determine whether a statistic will be predictive or not, because there could be a lot of other data, a lot of noise, so to speak, where you have other factors. Maybe the ones that increased the turnover, that was because they didn't have good food in the cafeteria. So you kind of have to isolate your variables. You kind of have to look at many examples of where everything else was the same, but except for this one factor. I mean, that's really the scientific method, which is easy to do when you're talking about experiments, or relatively easy to do when you're talking about experiments, not as easy to do when you're talking about organizational behavior, because you don't really get to run experiments with companies. Companies aren't willing to say, okay, for the sake of science, we're going to risk our company's future to test X, Y, and Z. But to the extent it exists, it may not be as easy, or it may not be as reliable as scientific data, but it's certainly the sort of thing that you want to try to use. So you can create targeted marketing strategies to look at, how is a particular marketing variable going to do based on how it's done in similar situations. And big data is also used to define objectives, develop theories of causality, which means a theory as to why one thing caused another, test the theories to see which ones actually work and which ones are actually relevant to your objectives. And there are a tremendous amount of goals and challenges that organizational behavior is going to have to try to look at and try to help improve the organizational structure. Here are just some examples, and we're just going to go through these quickly because all of these are going to come around again as we move along in the later chapters. But responding to economic pressures. The economy may be different than it once was, might be better, might be worse, might be just different. Things might be more digitalized. Things might have to move a little faster. The opportunities may be greater, but the risks it might also be a little greater. Responding to globalization, whereas your market might have been local once, now you have to look at things that are manufactured around the world, and your customer base might be more around the world, especially if you're able to market things online. There could be people that are consuming your services, whereas it used to be just your local retail outfit. Maybe you can sell things around the world. Managing workplace diversity, that's another important thing. Making sure that if you have people of different ethnic groups, different genders, different backgrounds, they're able to work together. Improving customer service, which is important, especially in today's day and age where there's so much competition from a global perspective, where everybody can compete pretty much everywhere else. Making sure that your customer service is good keeps your customers. Improving people skills, working in networked organizations, getting ideas from maybe even other companies, maybe even competitors. If you go to conferences and workshops, people who even are your competitors might be giving seminars. You might be able to get ideas from them. Networking can be very important. Enhancing employee well-being at work to decrease turnover, to increase employee satisfaction, creating a positive work environment, and of course improving ethical behavior, which benefits society, but also benefits you because it benefits your reputation, and it allows, in having an ethical workplace, is the sort of thing that the employees can be proud of and can improve employee morale. It can help with your customers. It can help with a variety of things. And let's, kind of look at some of these in a little bit more depth. Although again, we're going to be coming back again and again to these things as we move along and get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty. Responding to economic pressures, in that effective management can be good. It can be hard in bad economic times, but it could also be hard in good economic times. Just because the economy is good doesn't inherently mean that your company is necessarily going to flourish with everybody else. Maybe in good economic times, what you're looking to do is build a little bit of a cushion for the recession that comes next time around. Maybe you're wondering whether to expand your organization. Maybe in bad economic times, you're just kind of trying to hang on, where in good economic times you want to expand. In good economic times you want to grow to the point where you make yourself recession proof, or you give yourself a point where you don't have to worry about the next downturn. So good management in general could be the difference between survival and failure, and that's whether you're talking about good economic times and bad economic times. Another thing about good economic times is it very often increases competition. More people have capital, more people are going into business, and more people are going into competition with you. And here we have a little bit of a blurb on each of some of the goals that we're going to look at before we get into more detail in the subsequent chapters. Workforce diversity means managing different people from different backgrounds, organizations, all types of organizations, especially because of globalization and because you might have people in different cities and different countries. Organizations are becoming more of a mix, more of a heterogeneous mix, which means which means really a mix of different types of people in terms of gender, age, race, ethnicity, religion, all sorts of things. You need to be able to deal with people who work with your organization in many different capacities, regardless of their background. That's become a very important idea of management and organizational behavior. Improving customer service and people skills is critical to any organization because service jobs are so important. Back in the old days, back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, I don't mean to call them the old days necessarily, but a lot of the economy in the United States, at least, was based on manufacturing. Certainly around World War II time and shortly afterwards in the automobile industry and during the war, during the armaments industry, but even things like textiles, toys, whatever trinkets that were created were built here in the United States. Now, for the most part, they're built in China and Thailand, South Korea, places like that. And so, what do? Primarily, instead of going out and building cars, well, we still build cars in Michigan, but instead of putting together sweaters or blankets and textile manufacturing, which is really going to Asia, what do we do instead? Well, we do service jobs. We are professionals. We're accountants. We're attorneys. We're web developers. We're occupational therapists. We're speech therapists. We do things that are more in the service industry. And when you're working on an assembly line building a car, you don't really have to have such great customer service skills because you never deal with the customer unless you're the salesperson in the store. But today's day and age, a much higher percentage of people interact with customers, which is one of the reasons why people skills and customer service skills have taken on such outsized importance. Working in networked organizations means organizations that deal a lot with other departments within your own big company and, as we discussed before, with other people outside of your company. Networking with people in the industry is, of course, also very important to kind of understand the latest trends. And it's the sort of thing that you can find out so much information with message boards, with seminars, attending webinars, attending conferences. There's so much information out there that's so easy to get that in the old days maybe it was not possible to get this information, but if the managers who can take advantage of all this information are going to be at a tremendous advantage. Enhancing employee well-being at work and also maybe not at work, because the line between being at work and not at work has blurred tremendously in recent times. Again, I hate to keep using this expression, but in the old days, when you left work at 5:30 or whatever it was, and that was it. You had nothing to do with work until tomorrow morning. Maybe once in a while they can call you on the phone at home, but it wasn't that common. Basically, you didn't have your files at home. There's nothing really you could do. Today, you have your files everywhere. If you have Dropbox or some sort of web sharing application, you've got files at any computer. Maybe you've got your files on your phone, and anybody can reach you pretty much whenever they like, and they can text you, they can email you, they can call you, and the idea of being productive at work and being productive at home and being happy in both places is the sort of thing that's much harder than it used to be. It's harder than it used to be, but it's also in a sense there's more of an opportunity to be productive in some subtle ways outside of work time even. Creating a positive work environment, also a major goal of any organizational behavior strategy. How they develop human strengths, foster vitality and resilience. Sounds a little melodramatic, but vitality means stamina, the ability of people to constantly, do the same job and be able to do it in a way that is consistent over the long course of time. Resilience, which means coming back from setbacks. Every company's got setbacks. Every person has setbacks. Coming back from them is a very important thing to develop in your organization and your people, and to focus on what's good about the organization, not necessarily what's bad. Focusing on the negatives. Obviously, the negatives need to be corrected, but especially when dealing with individuals, focusing on their positives to motivate them is usually going to be a better strategy than focusing on their negatives. And then we have maybe the toughest one, and that is improving ethical behavior. Because employees, managers of companies themselves face ethical dilemmas or ethical choices all the time. The idea of to what extent do we take into account the good of society? To what extent do we take into account the real good of our customers? Will we make more money trying to kind of pull the wool over their eyes? Even if we don't lie to them, maybe if we're not 100% honest with our customers, maybe we'll make more money. And the same thing is true with the employees, other people in the industry. Do we release statements that we know are a little misleading that are likely to help us? These are things that have to be considered very carefully and have to be focused on very vigilantly by managers and organizations. It can be very difficult in the global economy where different cultures approach different decisions from different perspectives. Maybe your competitor is from a different country where they don't see ethics in the same way, where they think that there's nothing wrong with trying to fool a consumer. Maybe they think caveat emptor. They think let the buyer beware. We'll say whatever we have to do. Maybe your culture puts a little bit more of a premium on ethics. Maybe your culture puts less of a premium on ethics, and you have to worry about what your customer or people from other cultures will think of you. Companies promoting strong ethical missions. I'm not going to say all companies are like that, but certainly there are many companies that have strong ethical missions, especially companies that are maybe religious or charitable in nature, or trying to maybe develop alternative energies or improving, decreasing poverty, things like that. And what they should do, if they're practicing what they preach, is to encourage their own employees to behave with integrity and provide strong leadership and training, influence that encourage and influence their employees to behave ethically.